Hello and welcome. In this video I'm going to talk through the tools and materials you need to make silver metal clay jewellery from home. Now metal clay is a wonderful material to work with because it's pretty simple and easy to set up at home yourself. And whilst I have quite a few tools and materials on the desk that I'm going to talk through, not all of them are essential. So I'm going to talk through the essential ones and then also go on to bits that you can build into your metal clay kit over time. So there are two different kinds of metal clay, two different main brands, which is Art Clay Silver, which you can see on this packet here, and also PMC. And there are more and more different types of metal clay being brought out all the time, but I'm going to use the term metal clay to mean any kind of metal clay that you can work with. So of course you're going to need some clay, and they normally come in a packet that looks a little bit like this, and it will say how many grams are on the packet. So this is a 20-gram packet. You can also get 10 grams, 7 grams, 5 grams, whatever size you want to work with. So that's the clay, and there's also a paste. So often we use paste for joining different parts together. So in terms of your materials, a paste is quite a nice thing to have. You can actually make your own paste as well. So if you're just starting out and want to keep things fairly lean, you can just start with the clay and create your own paste. But as you build up over time, you might want to get some paste as well. For rolling out the clay, I like to use a Teflon sheet. So this is just literally like a Teflon sheet that you could use in baking, but it's a nice flat sheet and it's got kind of waxy surface so the clay doesn't stick to it. So that's quite a nice piece to have in your kit. Then I have a simple roller. So it's just a kind of plastic tube that I use to roll out the clay. That's an essential part of working with metal clay pretty much. Then playing cards. People who are new to metal clay often wonder why we have playing cards in our toolkit. These are used as spacers to make sure that when I roll out the clay, it's consistent. So if I were to put a chunk of cards on one side of the clay, a chunk of cards on the other, and I was going to roll down the middle, then I get a nice even thickness. You can also buy commercial spacers. So some people prefer those, but I'm a big fan of the playing cards. I also use them to just transport my clay around if I'm putting it on a hot plate or if I want to leave it somewhere to dry. Badger balm is a useful addition to your kit. It's not essential. You can use a bit of olive oil, but if you work with metal clay a lot, then badger balm is quite a useful thing to have. It's to grease the area that you're going to be working on to make sure the clay doesn't get stuck to anything. So you'd put that on your roller, on your mat, and on any cutters or shapers that you use. Another essential for working with metal clay is to have a torch and a fire brick. So you can see these over here. So just a basic hand torch, which you can buy from any jewellery supply shop, any metal clay shop, and a fire brick, which will help protect your surfaces. Of course, we don't want to fire anywhere other than a heat-proof area to make sure we're being very safe and cautious. So you do need one of those each. Then some other things that you might want to get, and this is where it starts to get a bit more optional. So we've got the tools for rolling out the clay, we've got the tools for firing the clay. That's the essentials. Another really useful bit of kit is a drill. So these are often called a pin vise or a hand drill, and it's just a metal vise with a drill in the top. And if I unscrew that, you'll see you can attach any size drill bit that you like. So if you want to make bigger holes, they normally come with a set of drill bits. That's what this bit is called. And just pop those in there and screw it in, and you can drill your clay very gently because it's often quite soft at the stage you drill it, but you drill it with that to make holes for pendants or earrings, anything that you're making. This is an agate burnisher. These are used for polishing up your clay. So agate is a stone which is on the end, and it's quite a hard stone. So I'll rub this against my fired clay, and you can also use this if you're working in sterling silver, to give it a nice shine. So that's a kind of polishing, sometimes stone setting, but generally polishing tool. This over here is a brass bristle brush, which is a bit of a tongue twister, and these are very helpful for when you fired your clay. It's the first stage in the polishing process is to give it a brass brush. So that's a helpful tool to have. Again, not essential, you can still polish without it. So if you're trying to keep everything really basic to begin with, it's not essential, but it is a really nice tool to have once you get going with your metal clay. I like to have a paintbrush around. This is handy for a number of reasons. I can use it dry to dust off the clay if I'm doing sanding and I want to get rid of any sanded bits, and I can use it wet to just wet the clay or attach additional pieces. It's just always handy to have a paintbrush nearby. This one over here is a rubber block. Not an essential, but some people might say it was. This is used for supporting your work. So if I'm sanding or polishing or doing any kind of additions to my work after I've made it, this is quite nice to just raise it up a little bit, and it's rubber, so it's vaguely kind of sticks to it while you're doing your sanding and your polishing. So if you find you do lots of sanding and polishing and it's difficult to hold the piece, this will really help with that. If you're going to be making rings in metal clay, which not everyone does, but it is quite a fun thing to try out, you're going to want a wooden mandrel stick like this, which you can get. They're not very expensive, and that's a tapered stick which we use for making our rings. And you're also going to want a ring sizer. So you can get a plastic one. There's also metal ones that you can buy, and you may already have one if you're a jeweler already, but these two are going to be important if we're going to be making rings. Tweezers is an essential really, because if we're going to be torch firing and we want to move our piece while it's hot, tweezers are going to be important for that. So that's the main thing I use tweezers for. Also sometimes if I'm doing stone setting and I want to apply the stone really into the piece gently, tweezers can be handy for that as well. I always keep some cling film on my desk when I'm working in metal clay. This helps to keep the clay sealed and dry whilst I'm working with it. So once I've opened the clay, I want to make sure I don't expose it to the air too much, because it dries out fairly quickly, and the softer it is, the easier it is to work with. So cling film is always handy to have nearby to just wrap up that clay to keep it nice and moist. A needle tool is a very handy tool to have when you're working with metal clay. Again, not an essential, we're off the essentials now and onto kind of things that we like to work with, but a needle tool is really handy, or even just using a needle, like a sewing needle, can be useful for just getting into any detailed areas, pushing down any stones, and also if you're using a stencil, sometimes I put stencils over the clay to cut around it, then I just use the end of the tip to kind of cut around that too. So there are various things I can use for getting shapes in my metal clay. So I've got moulding sheets like this one, which you can buy and create moulds from. I can also create my own moulds using moulding compound. So it's normally comes something looking like this, a 2-part moulding compound of blue and white. And as I mix them together, mix equal sizes of it together, it starts to harden, and I can push anything I like into it, shells, coins, any kind of charm that you've already got that you like the look of, and create a mould of it to use in my metal clay. It's also used in fingerprint jewellery, which is quite popular in metal clay as well. Then I've got some texture tiles or texture sheets. There are numerous amounts of these that you can find online and in different places. So I've got a rubber one here, I've got a couple of plastic ones. These have lots of different textures that I can then push into the clay. You can also use natural textures like leaves or feathers or anything that you want to roll into the clay. It gives a really nice look to it. And you can actually create your own texture sheets as well. There are whole kind of courses and areas on that too, but there's lots of these. Some people use wallpaper samples like with different textures on, or leather. Anything that has a texture you can pretty much use for your metal clay. Then I have some cookie cutters. So you can cut out shapes in your clay with these. So you want to use fairly small cookie cutters. These are all very small. You can use slightly larger ones as well. For cutting out. You probably don't want to use actual cookie size ones. That's going to be a lot of clay, and because we're working with silver it does get expensive, but a little set of cookie cutters is always a nice thing to have to hand. I've got GLANOL here, which anyone who's seen my videos before, I use it a lot. You probably know it's one of my favourite. It's a metal polish, so I use this at the very final stage of polishing to polish up my pieces and get a really nice high shine on them. Speaking of polishing, I also love my polishing papers. So you can buy these. They normally come in a big sheet, an A4 sheet of polishing papers, and you go through the grades. So you start with grey, green, grey, blue, pink, mint, cream, and you polish your pieces with those and it will give a really nice high shine. So I always have some of those to hand. And finally, I've got some baby wipes. So just useful for cleaning up your area when you're working in clay, and sometimes I even use it on the clay to give a bit of moisture. It's also useful just to have a tiny bit of water nearby, just in case you need to add a little bit to the clay. And finally, I'm just going to show you the hot plate and the barrel polish to finish. So this is my hot plate. You can use any hot plate. It's a pretty straightforward, simple piece of equipment. You don't have to have one of these to do metal clay from home, but it does speed up the drying process. So if you're going to be doing lots of metal clay, or you've tried it and you've enjoyed it, then this is quite a nice investment. And I think this one's about £20, so it's not expensive. And when I use this to dry my metal clay, I put it on a very low heat, so the lowest heat possible, and I'll only put it on for 5 minutes or so, and it will dry the piece. It can also be used for K&Boo, which is adding gold to your metal clay. So if you develop your metal clay further, you might use it for that. So that's a hot plate. The other bit of kit that is interesting to look at as you grow as a metal clay jeweller is a barrel polish, or a Lorraine tumbler, which is this particular make. This is for polishing your work. So it comes with a barrel and a rotary tool, and what happens is the barrel moves around. When I put it on here, it spins around and it just polishes the piece. So if I open that up, I'll just show you inside. It's got some steel shots, which are basically little steel balls, very soft steel balls and rods, and some water. So that's the steel shot. So you buy it as steel shot to come with the barrel, and there's some water, and you can either put a barrel liquid in there, or I often use fairy washing up liquid. And this is great if you're doing lots of metal clay work, because it is a really nice way to polish them up without taking too much of your time, especially if you're running a business using metal clay or silver jewellery. Then I really recommend this as a nice investment. So that's all the tools and materials pretty much that you can use for metal clay. There's always more tools and things being developed and little gadgets that you can add on, which is always fun to do. But that's a good start. And if you're just starting out and you just want to get the very basics, you just want a hand torch, a block, some playing cards, something to grease your area like your olive oil, and a roller to roll your stuff out. And if you want any textures or cutters, they're a really good addition too. So best of luck with your metal clay. Do check out our other tutorials to see how to make the clay, how to fire it, and how to create gorgeous pieces in it. And if you'd like to learn more, come and find us over on the Jewellers Academy website at jewellersacademy.com. Thank you so much for being here, and I'll see you on another video very soon.